Hello, everyone. A very good evening to all of you. Hope you can see us and hear us well. My name is Dananath, and today we are going to talk about avoiding Beirut and lessons from the economic crisis in Lebanon. So, joining with me today is Gadir Hamadi. She is a journalist and a media specialist. Gadir, thank you for joining today's discussion and welcome. And very grateful for joining with us this evening. And joining with
Thank you
me
so much.
also Patrick Mardini, Dr. Patrick Mardini. He's the CEO of the Lebanese Institute for Market Studies. We are having some technical problems, but I'm sure we are going to sort it out to hear Patrick well, and we can see him now. So, welcome, Patrick. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you can hear us. Patrick, I think we can't hear you yet. We can see you. Probably you have to leave and join back and probably switch on the unmute the microphone. Till we get Patrick back, I'm going to continue the discussion with Gadir. But before that, Gadir, I just wanted to quickly brief, provide a quick overview about Lebanon and Sri Lanka from what I heard and from what I read. Basically, Lebanon was called the Switzerland in Middle East, and Sri Lanka was also called the Switzerland in Asia. And from what I read, Lebanon's GDP dropped down to about 4,800 per capita in 2021 from 8,000 in 2018. And also, just to provide about the landmass and the population, Lebanon has about 6.8 million, and Sri Lanka we have about 21 to 22 million population, and landmass is about 10,000 square kilometers, and Sri Lanka is about 65,000 square kilometers. And that's basically the background. And Lebanon is also depending a lot on tourism and remittances. And Sri Lanka is also the case is the same. And Lebanon had a civil war, and Sri Lanka also had a civil war which ended in 2012. So that's the basic context. Gadir, I just wanted to ask you basically what happened in Lebanon in your view, and Sri Lanka is also currently going through a crisis. I just wanted to know your review on what really happened in Lebanon.
Thank you so much for hosting me. It's really a pleasure to be with you on this talk. In 2018, we were hearing talks that Lebanon is on the verge of collapse, and people on WhatsApp groups were receiving voice notes. Soon, we're going to be running out of water. We're going to be running out of medication. We're going to be running out of fuel. The banks are going to close their money. The banks are going to close their doors, and people won't be able to access their money. But actually, this all seemed a bit bizarre to us in Lebanon. So since 2018, we were hearing that this is going to happen, but no one really wanted to believe it, because you cannot imagine something so horrible happening seemingly overnight for each citizen. So what happened is, in 2019, on October 17, the government decided to impose a tax on WhatsApp. And like as you said, the population in Lebanon is around 6 million, but there are no accurate estimates, there are no accurate measures. But the people residing outside Lebanon, Lebanese living outside Lebanon, are around 14 million. So there are more people outside Lebanon than in Lebanon. And WhatsApp is the free app that people can use to connect to their family members that are living outside. And it was like the straw that broke the camel's back, because on October 17, 2019, at night, the streets of Lebanon were filled with protesters from the north to the south to Beirut. Protesters were filling the streets, protesting mainly on the WhatsApp tax, but also because the situation was getting out of hand. When that happened, banks closed their doors, and the politicians who used to have billions of dollars stored in the banks, started transferring them to offshore accounts, mainly in Switzerland. And people who had their money in the banks were no longer able to access it. So you actually had people who had their life savings in the banks, some people who had put their retirement money in the banks, Uh, people were big, many people had all their money in the banks. It wasn't common for people to hide their money at home. Banks were trusted in Lebanon, and then suddenly the bank isn't wasn't giving people their cards, and the lira, the Lebanese lira, which is the currency, was pegged at $1 is 1,507 liras. And then suddenly the rate started going up, and the lira now in 2022, the lira has lost over 90% of its value. And today it's $1 is 24,800. Whereas 2 years ago, it was one lira was 1,507. So you can imagine how hard that made it, how hard life became for the average citizen.
So, how did you actually survive? So, when you said like you couldn't withdraw money from the bank and your currency depreciated from I think about 1,500 per dollar to, as you say, about uh,
24.
24,000, right?
Yes.
So a massive depreciation. So, what did people do to survive, and how did you survive? And what is your advice for similar countries?
There has been protests on and off. We have witnessed high levels of suicide, as unfortunately, especially amongst the youth, who have suddenly felt that their whole future has been stopped seemingly overnight. Many people have dropped out of school and out of universities, and we are noticing more and more people begging on the streets and people knocking on the doors of our houses asking for money. And this, maybe it used to happen before the crisis, but not to this extent. You cannot imagine the number of people who are begging on the streets. We are trying families, as I said, there are more people living outside Lebanon than in Lebanon. So families who are living abroad are trying to transfer dollars as much as possible to the people living inside. And Lebanon, unfortunately, now is relying mainly on aid by international organizations and NGOs who are trying to help. And people are relying on their family members that live abroad. And unemployment rate in 2019 used to be 35% amongst the youth. Now it's between 70 and 77%. So that's more than half of the people sitting at home, unable to work and fend for themselves.
So, Garir, just to understand the context, so we from what I read, Lebanon
Yes.
had a very strong banking sector, and
Yes.
what caused this crisis basically? So, in Sri Lanka, we borrowed, in our view, a lot of money in dollar terms, and we invested in non-revenue generating projects, and at the same time there was multiple shocks uh, in the economy, like COVID. There was the Easter attack, which had an impact on tourism. I just wanted to understand what was the main cause, because after the coming back from the economy after the civil war in 1990s, what led Lebanon to move in this direction, in your view?
Yes, yes. Our banking scene is similar to the one in Sri Lanka, but what happened is that after the 15-year civil war that ended in the 90s, Lebanon borrowed a lot of money to rebuild the country, and especially Beirut, because it was damaged to the ground. And this money was never returned, it was looted. And also, there was, since 2011, before that, Lebanon used to depend a lot also on tourism. But actually, since 2011, the Syrian civil war started, and Syria is on the border with Lebanon. And of course, when your neighboring country is at war, your country also gets affected. And there was a massive refugee crisis in a country that's already suffering. And the situation in the Middle East since 2011 has been really unstable. So this instability has also reflected itself on Lebanon. We've had multiple suicide attacks by ISIS and so on over the years, which has also not only scared tourists from coming to Lebanon, but also foreign investors were worried about investing in a country that's extremely, unfortunately, unstable. And what happened also in 2020 is that we had the massive port blast. I don't know if you saw the massive port blast, which left the city in ruins, and the reconstruction needs billions of dollars. Until now, it has still not been reconstructed fully. So you can also imagine the main port in the city was bombed, it exploded, and Lebanon was not able to import many of the products that it usually imports. So we also had this major blow, and of course COVID-19 took a bigger blow in a country that was already suffering even before the pandemic.
Okay, thanks, Gadir, for that introduction. I think Patrick is online. Patrick, can you hear us? Just indicate us when you can hear us. Okay. Till Patrick joins, Gadir. So the context is you also borrowed a lot of money to build Beirut after the civil war, and of
Yes.
course there were external shocks in and there was also sort of a refugee. You have been basically Lebanon has been hosting most of the refugees from Syria and neighboring countries, and you had a bigger population working outside Lebanon who have been sending money to Lebanon. Uh, so. Uh, so what's the situation now, and how is life in Lebanon now? Patrick, can you hear us in the meantime? All right. Yes, Patrick, we can't hear you, unfortunately. Still, that audio issue is there. You can hear us, but unfortunately, we can't still hear you. Not yet, Patrick. Uh, I'll leave it for our comms team to coordinate with you. Till then, I'll move to Gadir back again. Gadir, so just tell us, how is the situation now? I saw that you have secured a IMF program and there was a debt restructuring talks. Is it still on? And what was the aftermath after the default in 2020 March? How things move forward from there?
Unfortunately, things have still been deteriorating since March, and the IMF talks are still on, but they're taking a lot of time. And some people in Lebanon are against. They're using the Somalia example and saying when the IMF entered Somalia, the crisis became worse. And some people are saying that the only solution for Lebanon now is the IMF. Some people regard the IMF as an imperialist institution, and they do not want to go through the negotiations with them. So we're having this clash between different, let's say, economists or people in power or people in the decision making process some people believe that if we went to the IMF, it's going to increase our situation, like it's going to make our situation worse. And some people are saying this is the only current solution that's going to rescue Lebanon. And since the war started in Ukraine and Lebanon imports 90% of its wheat and cooking oil from Ukraine, we've been having a major bread crisis. People are waiting in the hours in front of bakeries to buy bread. And sometimes at the end of the day, after waiting for hours, the bakers are saying we ran out of bread, you have to leave. So can you imagine waiting for hours for something as essential as bread and then not receiving it? And Lebanon is saying they only have up to 1 month's reserve of wheat. So after 1 month, Lebanon might not have any more bread.
Thanks, Gadir, for that detailed explanation. Guys, you can also ask questions. So if you have questions, please send it us on the YouTube comment strip and also on Facebook comment strip, so we can shoot those questions to Gadir, and hopefully we'll be able to again reconnect with Patrick when the connectivity and the audio matter is sorted out. So Gadir, so in the meantime, so the situation is just to quickly brief those who joined a few minutes ago. So Lebanon and Sri Lanka has some similarities, it seems, in terms of our revenue channels, because Lebanon also has a big diaspora outside Lebanon. They are sending money and they are also dependent on tourism. And also they had a civil war till 1990s, but the exception was there were terrorist attacks from Syria, and also a lot of Syrian refugees moved to Lebanon, and they defaulted in 2020 March. and they also experienced similar long queues for bread and essentials, and things got worse with the Ukraine and Russian war, because about, if I remember right, if I heard it right, about 90% of main
Yes.
gas and main wheat is also uh, imported from Ukraine and Russia. So that was the problem.
Yes.
Gadir, I also heard about this explosion in the port of Beirut. So it was during the pandemic time, and from what I watched was while the crisis was uh, brewing, this explosion was like the last nail on the coffin. Could you explain what actually happened and what was the sequence of events, and how it happened for our viewers' interest?
Okay, so what happened is that on August 4, 2020, around 6 p.m., there was a lot of smoke that was coming out of the port, and they called the civil defense that there seems to be a small fire. And then they sent a group of volunteers who volunteer for the civil defense, and they sent the trucks of water, and because they thought it's like a small fire. And then in a few minutes, the fire started increasing and spreading, and then there was an explosion that was described as a nuclear-like explosion that killed over 200 people and injured thousands and caused billions of dollars in damage. So when that happened, people were wondering, is this an attack? Was Lebanon bombed? What really happened? So what turns out to be is that there had been tons of ammonium nitrate that were stored in the port, and the blame game has been going on. Who stored them? What got them
Can you
here?
see me? Can you hear me now?
Patrick,
Yes.
clear. And finally, we
I
can
cannot see
hear
you.
you.
I
And
cannot
you.
hear you.
Thank you very much for taking all the effort to join, Patrick. I'll quickly move to Patrick Gadir before I come back
Yes.
to the explanation on the explosion on Port of Beirut. Patrick, thank you very much for our viewers. Patrick is the CEO of Lebanese Economic Institute for Market Studies, Lebanese Institute for Market Studies. Patrick is a good friend of ours. Patrick, we can hear you well. Uh, Patrick, can you explain uh, what was your view on the economic situation in Lebanon and what happened? Okay, I think now Patrick can't hear us. Okay, Gadi, why don't you continue with the answer on what happened in the port of Belarus?
Yes. So after the explosion happened,
I
Lebanon
cannot hear
started
you. I cannot
receiving.
see you. I will try to reload the page.
Okay, go ahead, Gadi.
So what happened is that Lebanon received billions of dollars in aid from the UN, from neighboring countries, from the Arab world, from beyond. Some of the aid was actually used to help the people to rebuild the houses, to provide aid to the people that really need it. But also, many of the aid was unfortunately stolen. So we have billions of dollars that were sent to Lebanon, but they were stolen by corrupt parties, corrupt NGOs sometimes too. So corruption seems to be the main and the primary cancer of Lebanon, as we like to call it.
Sorry, Gadir, just wanted to know, Patrick, can you hear us? Not yet. So, Gadir, just wanted to understand. So, how about the electricity situation? Because we are at the moment having like long power cuts for going for about 6 weeks, for about 6 hours. It went for about 12 hours earlier. How was the situation on electricity and fuel, mainly on in Lebanon?
Because we're having a dollar crisis in Lebanon, and to import fuel, you need dollar. We had a huge shortage of fuel last summer, and people were waiting over 8 to 12 hours to fill up their cars, which was and the photos were all over social media.
Hello.
That how is this happening in Lebanon?
Okay.
Go ahead, Gadir.
Okay, and now we don't have a fuel crisis anymore, but the prices have skyrocketed. So now we have fuel, but it's extremely expensive, and because the government is not providing more than 1 hour of electricity a day, so we are having 23 hours a day no, with no electricity. So Lebanon has been relying on private generators since decades. So you pay a private generator to provide you with electricity, but sometimes those generators are also not able to provide this electricity because, as I said, fuel prices are skyrocketing. So some people are having to deal with 23 hour cuts of electricity per day. And this
Okay.
also affects the schooling. Many schools are now only online in Lebanon. So many kids have suffered due to the electricity cuts and so on. And during the fuel cuts, many kids go to school. So the country is really collapsing and the situation really is out of hand. And I never thought this is going to happen in Lebanon, but the situation unfortunately seems to be getting worse by the day. What people
Okay.
are trying to do, yeah, tell me.
Okay, so we are getting Patrick also on the call. There's an audio issue, but he can hear me on the phone. But Patrick, we can hear you quite clearly, and we can see you. Patrick, I just wanted to get your explanation also on the crisis. What really went wrong in your view when you have been studying about Lebanon's economy for quite some time? Okay, unfortunately, we lost Patrick again. Uh, Hamadi, if I heard you right, you had 20 hours power cut. Is it still on? Is it how is the power situation now?
The power situation is not good at all. We're having, as I said, 23-hour cuts of electricity per day. And electricity is becoming also extremely expensive. So even as I told you, some people rely on most of the people used to rely on private generators to secure electricity, but now those generators are also becoming extremely expensive, and electricity, unfortunately, has become a luxury. Electricity has become a luxury to a large population in Lebanon.
Okay,
So we have
Patrick.
people now living without electricity.
Okay, Patrick, can you hear us over the phone? Okay, but unfortunately, again, we can't hear you. We heard you on the call on the live stream a short while ago, but again, we can't hear you. But you can actually you is can you hear us? Okay, Patrick, why don't you? Ye- Yes, we are hearing you through the phone. Uh, okay. Uh, okay, I'll try to connect you through the microphone on the loudspeaker from my end. Patrick, why don't you give your view on what happened to Lebanese economy? We have a lot of questions. Before I move to questions, there are particular questions about the IMF and what are the arguments against going to IMF. Could you explain what your view on the Lebanese economy? Patrick? Okay. I think Patrick, there's a delay. You can start the answer. I think there's a yes. Go ahead.
So basically, the government was spending more than the income that they were generating, which have been piling up a debt, and Lebanon reached a very high
Okay,
level.
Patrick. Sorry, Patrick. I think there's a problem with the audio. I have to stop you because it can't hear from my phone quite well. I will ask our comms team to get back to you. Gadir, in the meantime, why don't you tell us a little bit about the IMF program? Because Madhavi has asked what are the arguments against the IMF program, and again, Ravindu Samarasinghe has also asked what is the argument against the IMF programs and the pros and cons about it. Could you explain a little bit about that, Gadir? What really happened? Was there a delay in going to IMF, or what was the argument on IMF or not?
It seems that Lebanon is going to, it has no other option. As I said, we're in total collapse. So it seems that there is no other way than to head towards the IMF. Arguments against in Lebanon, they're saying that Lebanon cannot keep resorting to outside powers to help it, to assist it because of political reasons. But they're saying that if you went to the IMF, it's going to, like the loans they're going to give Lebanon will enable the countries to pursue reckless domestic policies. So they're not sure when the aid comes, who's going to monitor it and so on.
Okay, so was there a delay? I mean, to going to IMF, Gadir?
Now the negotiations are still going on. The negotiations are still happening.
Okay, right. I'll take few questions from on our chat box and also on our Facebook feed. Bravi is asking how rapidly did the economic collapse from normal to chaos. Also, what were the policy responses by the government thus far? Why is the IMF program delayed? Is Ravi's question.
I think the delay started in, I think not the, I think what started, the problems were already happening under the table, but the Lebanese started seeing those problems in 2019 when the banks closed, when people were not able to access their funds anymore, when the electricity cuts started becoming worse and longer. The government, unfortunately, has no plan and has not proposed any solution yet. There has been no serious measures taken to stop this crisis. On the contrary, we now have upcoming elections, and the elections are next month, and the same people who have been in power for 30 years and who are being accused of causing the mess that we're in are also running. And unfortunately, we do still see people who are willing to vote for them again. The aid that was sent to Lebanon, as I said, some of it really helped in the crisis and especially after the explosion, but many of it is also missing.
Okay. Okay. And also, now I just want to ask you. So you said the government the there was a problem on withdrawing money from the banks. So so how did you actually then, if you don't have the access for money, was it like fully controlled, or was there like a limited amount that you could you could withdraw? And without money, like how did you basically survive without money?
In the beginning, the banks were completely closed. Now they allow you to draw a certain amount of money outside. People were using their savings. Some people had savings at home, but of course they were limited because, as I said, most of the people put all their money in the banks. People hardly ever kept their savings with them at home, but they were trying to use, and they started asking for help from family members abroad, and like people outside Lebanon have been sending a lot of money to their family members. So I think this is basically what is being what is happening. People are relying on family members abroad, cousins, uncles, parents, sons, daughters, to send them money to Lebanon. This has been the situation.
Okay, Patrick, I think we can hear you on the WhatsApp on the phone. So just wanted to ask you on what is your reading. You basically mentioned what is your reading on the economic crisis in Lebanon? What really happened, and what is your recommendation for Sri Lanka?
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really sorry for this technical problem. It seems that my laptop and my phone are actually blocking studio stream, so that's why I'm unable to join. I hope you can hear me now. So Lebanon has been piling up imbalances for years now. The government has accumulated a very big debt because the government have been spending above their means, in order to finance mostly infrastructure projects. But those infrastructure projects were actually failed projects. They never gave good infrastructure. The government have been paying a lot of money. To be transparent on the issue, the government have been paying a lot of money for cronies, right? Those businessmen connected to the government, and spending above the income, piling up debt. Lebanon had one of the highest debt ratios in the world, like 170% of the GDP. That's the debt. That's a very, very big debt. And the banking system was historically uses to finance the government spending. Right, so mainly government rely on the banks to keep on financing their expenditures, and the banks basically were attracting foreign deposits from Lebanese living abroad, but also from the Lebanese diaspora, but also from the Arab countries, wealthy people from the Arab neighboring. So everybody was depositing their money in the Lebanese bank, and the Lebanese bank were the money to the government. In 2000 and let's say 12, I would say, the banks were not sure that the government can pay back the debt anymore. So they told the government, we will not give you money anymore. 2012, 2013. And that's where the central bank stepped in, and the central bank started to finance government expenditure, right? And this is a big problem. Why? Because in economics, there is a concept called the impossible trinity. And the impossible trinity means that you cannot have at the same time a fixed exchange rate, a free movement of capital, and an active monetary policy, right? You need to choose 2 out of 3. So if you have a fixed exchange rate and you have a free movement of capital, so if you don't have capital controls and you have a fixed exchange rate, you need to stop any monetary policy. You cannot do monetary policy. And this system, actually, that's what Lebanon did since the 90s. So from the 90s till 2012, till 2012, so since 1993 till 2012, Lebanon did not do any monetary policy. And basically, we had a stable currency, and this stable currency allowed to attract a lot of investments, a lot of deposits to the country, right? In 2012, the central bank started active monetary policy financing the government, because the banking system did not want to finance the government anymore, right? And the government did not want to reform. The government did not want to cut spending and start serious reform. So the central bank stepped in to finance those imbalances, right? And it exaggerated the problem. It made the problem bigger. And so basically, this system remained till 2000 and let's say 19. And in 2019, since the central bank was unable to finance the government anymore, for reasons that I can detail later if you like, we had the problem. We had the crash. Since we had an active monetary policy and free movement of capital, the normal thing to have is to have a more flexible exchange rate. So the Lebanese pound started a devaluation, right? And so the Lebanese pound lost, let's say, a lot of its value. Let's say it lost, the exchange rate doubled actually. But then what happened is that the central bank made the problem worse because they started printing money massively. Starting 2019, in order to resolve the problem of bank run. So when the crisis started in 2019, people ran to the bank, they wanted to withdraw their money. And in order to solve this problem, the central bank started to print Lebanese pound massively. The money supply, the money in circulation was multiplied by 9. This is like a 1,000% increase of money supply, which led to a sharp hyperinflation and a massive devaluation of the currency. So now in Lebanon, the Lebanese pound lost like 95% of its value because of this policy. People purchasing power have been massacred, right? They cannot buy anything now with their fixed Lebanese pound salary, because the salary in Lebanese pound cannot buy anything anymore. Of course, you don't have adjustment of salaries. You don't have any serious adjustment of salaries. So people went into poverty really quickly because of the devaluation and the hyperinflation. Banks are unable to meet withdrawals demand because they lended money to the government, and the government defaulted on the payment of debt. So basically, the depositors' money is with the government, and the government cannot pay it back, so depositors lost their money. So the Lebanese population lost their deposits, which means their life saving. They lost the value of their income with the devaluation, and with the economic recession, they lost their jobs. So actually they lost everything like this. Like within a year, it was a massive downhill situation. And here we are now, still with the same old bad policies. The central bank now is trying to control a little bit money supply by putting some restriction on cash withdrawals from the bank, and by forbidding people to convert their money at the bank from Lebanese pound into dollars. So through capital controls, well, implicit capital controls so far, we don't have an official law of capital control, but de facto banks are applying capital controls. So they are trying to control a little bit the devaluation with that, but the government is still spending above their means. You still have a deficit, and since nobody will lend money to the government because they know that the government won't pay it back, the only way to finance the deficit is through money supply. So basically, at the end of the day, you will have more deterioration. Situation today: government in default, hyperinflation, devaluation, and banking sector problem all together.
Thank you, Patrick. Finally, I'm very happy that I could hear you, and for that explanation. I have been discussing the same with Gadir. There are so many questions on the IMF. Gadir basically explained it, but Patrick, I just wanted to understand your view. We saw on news that there was a recent IMF program that the Lebanese government has agreed. Was there a delay, or what's your view? Because there's a big discussion in Sri Lanka whether we should not go to IMF or we should go to IMF, and these IMF conditions and all that. Patrick, what's your view?
So personally, in general, I'm not a big fan of IMF interventions. However, in the case of Lebanon, it is clear that the political establishment is unable to do reforms on their own. That's why, unfortunately, we need the IMF. It's like chemotherapy. Chemotherapy, when you have cancer, it's not a great thing. It makes you very weak. And maybe it won't work. We don't know. But usually, it's the last thing you do when all options are off the table, and that's the situation of Lebanon today, right? We tried in the past 2 years to do the reform. Nothing happened. The government is unable to do any reforms for many reasons, for special interest, for some populist reasons, mostly special interest, right? And even before the crisis, before 2019, we had a lot of promises of reform, and reform never happened. And even today, despite the massive collapse, nothing changed, business as usual. That's why, unfortunately, the only remaining solution is an IMF intervention. Now, the IMF have been negotiating with the government. They reached, as you said, a staff-level agreement. Now, a staff-level agreement is an unbinding agreement because the directors of the IMF did not sign the agreement yet. So there are some conditions that the Lebanese government need to fulfill before the agreement become official with the IMF. And I don't think that the Lebanese government will be able to fulfill those conditions before elections. We have elections in 1 month. I think that it will be after elections that we will see if the government is able to fulfill those conditions in order to sign a contract with the IMF, right? So that's on the IMF. Now, what are the reforms suggested by the IMF? So if we manage to sign, so those preconditions are mostly related to politics. They need to make sure that the government has a majority in the parliament, and the government is able to pass harsh reforms. So they asked for the government to be able to ratify the budget at the parliament, to be able to pass some capital control law at the parliament. They need to make sure that the government is able to pass law at the parliament before actually signing with the government. So those are the conditions. But more importantly, if we manage to sign an agreement with the IMF, where the IMF defined five reforms, 5 axes for reforms. The first one is the fiscal reform. the Lebanese government should start increase income and cut expenditure in order to rebalance the budget, the government budget. So we cannot run a deficit anymore. There should be a plan that would reduce deficit progressively and try to get a fiscal surplus eventually within a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, we don't know, but you need to have a plan to get out of deficit. So that's the first axis of reform. The second axis of reform is the banking reform, right? Banks need to be restructured. Banks are in a default situation. They're unable to meet their withdrawals demand. So you need to restructure the banking system, and that's very complicated politically because banks are very powerful in the parliament. So it's very hard to say to the bank, okay, you bankrupted, I'm going to close the bank. It's very, very complicated. So we think that it will be actually depositors who will be bearing the losses of the banks, not the bankers themselves. So that's the second axis of reform, very hard reform, the banking reform. The third axis of reform is you need to have exchange rate stability. So we need to stop this multiple exchange rate regime, but more importantly, the permanent devaluation of the exchange rate. So stability in the exchange rate, that's the third reform. The fourth reform, the fourth axis of reform is what the IMF calls the structural reform. In the case of Lebanon specifically, they mean electricity reform. By electricity reform, it means that electricity is responsible of like 50% of the debt. Government owns an electricity company, and this electricity make losses every year, right? They have the monopoly on producing electricity. They are unable to produce electricity and they make losses. Can you imagine? I mean, only the government can do that. Make losses out of a monopoly. So basically, you need to solve the electricity problem. That's the fourth axis of reform. And the last axis of reform is you need to do some reforms related to transparency, counterterrorism, money laundering, things like that. So those are the 5 axes of reform that Lebanon should do if we manage to sign an agreement with the IMF.
Thanks, Patrick. You are not alone. In Sri Lanka, also we have an electricity board which makes losses, and they are also running a big monopoly. So you are not alone, my friend. But in the meantime, I'll move to.
That's quite a relief. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. I'll move to Gadir. Gadir, there's a question from Oshan about the political stability, and from what I read, when the crisis was brewing, actually the government resigned. And how was the political situation grew up? I will come to Patrick as well after Gadir's response. Gadir?
I'm sorry, I missed the question. How was the political situation after?
Yes. So
After
was there a political instability? From what I read, the government resigned. Is it true, or what happened? And how is the political situation? Is there a stable government thereafter? For how long there was like a absence of a government?
Lebanon had historically, not only now, it had long periods of time when the government was resigning, when the president was resigning. There was long periods of time when Lebanon had no president, no government, and so on. This keeps happening, but the situation in general since 2019 has been the craziest and extremely unstable. Because as Dr. Patrick said, the price, people lost everything. So when the political situation is bad and the security situation is bad, there is just chaos everywhere. A video was trending last week all over social media that in one day, in different areas around Lebanon, people are just fighting one another over really seemingly useless, seemingly trivial stuff like parking spots, like some neighbor has a party or something like this. People were beating each other up because when the political situation is bad, the security situation is bad, everyone is just stressed. And as the elections are coming next month, people are preparing for it. Some people are going to abstain from voting because they feel that we are in way too deep for real reforms, that there's nothing that people can do anymore. Some people still want to vote for the same ruling class. So this is the situation now. People are waiting for the upcoming elections, where some people think that those elections are going to bring about the real change that the country needs, while others believe that this election is going to be similar to all the other elections. The same parties are always going to be in power, and it's just one big loop that we're living in. So the situation is, in one word, chaotic, unfortunately.
Thanks, Gadir. Patrick, I'll put the same question for you as well. Also, I saw on the news stories that the governor of the Lebanon Central Bank was denying that the about the bankruptcy, and he was saying that the Lebanese economy is resilient and there was no impact on the bankruptcy. And also, from what I heard, there was a lot of secrecy laws in the Lebanese banking system. So as a result, a lot of terrorist activities or whatever that activities, those money coming to the Lebanese banks, from what I read. Could you shed some light on this, Patrick, please, for us?
Sure, sure. So first on the political situation, in Lebanon, we had massive protests with the start of the crisis in 2019, late 2019, early 2020. And the protesters like to call it revolution. It was not really a revolution, it was massive protest. They blocked the main roads and people were protesting all night, all day against those bad economic conditions, asking the whole political establishment to leave, to resign, because they are fed up with the politicians who they feel are responsible for the crisis, right? So this was the situation at the beginning of the crisis, massive protests, but then protests died off with time, and the political establishment came back to the traditional game of to the traditional game. Now, as Ghadir said, we are heading toward elections, and those change groups, so those people who want change, are actually running for election, but we don't expect them to win any in the parliament. Actually, we expect them to have a very small representation in the parliament. So the political establishment will be unchanged, more or less. Maybe some adjustment will happen, but no major changes, despite the massive economic crisis that we are currently living. So that's on the political side. You can hear me, right?
Yes, Patrick, loud and clear.
Okay, good. Excellent. On the governor of the central bank, the monetary aspect, it's true. He said that banks are not bankrupted, but you need to look at it from his perspective. So from his perspective, the central bank is able to print money indefinitely, right? Give them to the banks so that the banks would allow the withdrawals of deposits in Lebanese pound. Now, deposits are denominated in dollars, right? And banks are only serving them now in Lebanese pound. If you want to withdraw, you can only withdraw in Lebanese pound. And so when the central bank governor said the bank are not in bankruptcy, he means that he is willing to finance those withdrawals via hyperinflation and devaluation. He has a printing machine and he can print Lebanese pounds indefinitely, right? From this perspective, for him, well, banks cannot fail because you have a last resort lender, a lender of last resort. Now, on the bank secrecy law, it's more related to the fifth axis of the IMF, the one related to counterterrorism and money laundering and things like that. It has been a request for the international community since all the time. You need to stop your banking secrecy law. And there is a law that is being discussed today in order to lift banking secrecy. Now, banking secrecy was an important pillar in the Lebanese economic system because it allowed to attract capitals from across the world, right? Now, with the removal of banking secrecy, Lebanon, I mean, if they do it, I think Lebanon should find a new model to attract capital. The advantage of bank secrecy is that people can come put their money in Lebanon and they are not taxed because you don't know who opened an account, right? Now, since they will be taxed in Lebanon, they will leave Lebanon. So it will accelerate the capital outflow of the country. It will put more pressure on the economy, I think, but maybe it will help also countering corruption. Let's wait and see.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Thank you very much. I would quickly move to Gadir. Gadir, there are a few questions asked from our audience. Fahim has asked, do you have like social safety nets program in Sri Lanka? We have a program called Samurdhi, where the people who are below the poverty line, we have a cash transfer, not a cash transfer, basically like a small stipend being given. And also, they wanted to know about your country's education and health Is it free education or free health? I would like to shed light from your end, Gadir, on those two questions very quickly.
People are now actually mainly depending on assistance from family members who are living abroad. This seems to be the system. There's a lot of grassroots movements and initiatives where a group of youth, for example, or let's say you have your connections who are living abroad. I have my connections that are living abroad, and let's say Dr. Patrick has his connections living abroad. We make like a social media account or a WhatsApp group, and we say we're a group of Lebanese youth. I'm volunteering with several of those initiatives. We say we're a group of trustworthy Lebanese youth, and we basically collect the funding, the money from Lebanese living in the diaspora, and not only Lebanese, because a lot of the Arab countries, we did like a social media campaign where we called on Arab citizens if they would like to donate to Lebanese citizens. We got a lot of donations, especially now during Ramadan. From Kuwait, we got a lot, and because we transfer them from US dollars to Lebanese, the money is able to help more than it used to before. So we try to do our own initiatives. This is what's basically happening. But there is not one, you mentioned the Samardi program. I don't think we have something like that in Lebanon. We have grassroots initiatives of youth trying to collect money from people abroad, people who have the money abroad, and trying to give it to the less fortunate in Lebanon. This is mainly what's happening. There is no one official system. There is small initiatives mainly by the youth.
How is health and education, Gadir?
The health and educational sector have been suffering a lot, mainly because since the crisis started, people have been leaving. So hundreds and thousands of medical professionals have left Lebanon in 2021, and educators too. Most of educators have left to the Gulf. So of course, our educational sector is also suffering a lot, and most of the medical professionals have left to Europe. Although there are no accurate estimates, but according to General Security in 2021, over 213,000 people left who are under the age of 35. So you can imagine what's happening. And Lebanon currently is mainly relying on the money being transferred from those people to it. So people are sitting at home. There are lack of jobs, lack of opportunities. People are sitting at home, mainly, unfortunately, and depending on outside money transfers. This seems to be the situation. There are some governmental schools, public schools, and and there's one public university, the Lebanese University. However, the most of the teachers and university instructors have been on strike because they are also not received. They are usually paid by the government, and the government has no money, so they have several months, and some people have several years of salaries that have still not been paid. So you can imagine the quality of education that the youth are getting and the kids
Gadir,
are getting.
very quickly, you have like a paid education and health system, or is it provided by the government? Very quickly.
From before, they used to fund some operations, like for chemotherapy, for cancer patients, for diabetic patients. Some surgeries were covered by the government, but not a lot. And now 90% of, or over 90% of the public hospitals are no longer taking in patients because they don't even have the equipment anymore, because there's no money to buy the equipment and so on. So people are relying on private hospitals that are also very expensive for the average citizen.
Okay, Patrick. Basically, you mentioned you basically with the crash, a lot of people are depending from money sent by the diaspora or who live outside Lebanon. So if the banks don't have dollars, how do you actually get the money? Because in Sri Lanka now, we also have a problem on withdrawing dollars because we also have ran out of dollars. Difficult to open LCs. Those problems are there. So how what's the sequence? I just wanted to know. And also, Dean has asked a question: have people now abandoned the Lebanon pound, or do they still use the currency? I would like to combine those two questions and get an answer from you, Patrick.
Very good questions. So first, on the money transfer into Lebanon, the Lebanese bank actually separated between what they called old dollars and fresh dollars, right? Any dollar that you deposited before 2019, actually before 2020, let's say, in the banking system is now under capital control. You can only withdraw it in Lebanese pound at an unfair rate. But those are deposits before 2020, right? So this is what we call old dollars. However, all the fresh dollars, so if today somebody living, let's say, in Sri Lanka sends money to somebody who lives in Lebanon, this person in Lebanon can go to the bank and withdraw those dollars in dollars, right? So you don't have any control on new dollars, but you do have controls on old dollars. So that's about the transfer. Now they are working on a capital control law, which would still allow people to send money into Lebanon, but would forbid people from sending money outside Lebanon or converting the Lebanese pound into dollars. If this capital control law is voted, what will happen is that people will stop sending money to Lebanon because they know that they won't be able to get it out. So I think it is counterproductive and it's a bad idea. The way they are voting it is a bad idea. You can have a better law, I think. So that's on the first question. And the second question, did people abandon the Lebanese pound? Yes, they did, in the sense that now people don't trust the Lebanese pound. All the
Patrick, we lost you. Patrick, I think we had a slight disconnect in the connection. Let me wait for few seconds to reconnect you. Yes, now it's better. Yes, go ahead. Sorry, we can hear you now.
Okay, so I was saying that people actually don't trust the Lebanese pound anymore. They are afraid it will lose more of its value, so more devaluation. They are keeping their money in US dollar, but when they go to the market and they want to spend money, they convert those dollars into Lebanese pound and spend in Lebanese pound.
Okay, thanks, Patrick.
So the savings are actually in dollar, but the daily spending happen in Lebanese pound.
Okay, understood. Thanks, Patrick. Gadir, could you also kindly shed us some light on the exports that the Lebanon do? People have asked, like, you have mentioned about the imports, but what are the main exports from Lebanon?
The main export of Lebanon is its human capital, really. This is the main export, the human capital. Brain
Okay.
drain, unfortunately.
All right. Thanks, Gadia. Patrick, there's a question from Ravi again. So you mentioned about reforms. You said that the necessary reforms weren't done. Even I saw when the US president donating some aid to Lebanon, he said there is no outside aid or assistance can rescue Lebanon. It is the reforms from the political leadership can only rescue Lebanon from its crisis. And Ravi has asked, what were the bottlenecks for those reforms, and why? What was that? What are the barriers for reforms in the early stages? That was a question from Ravi.
Sure. No, well, it is true that the international community do not trust the Lebanese government anymore. And they don't want to send any help to the Lebanese government, even humanitarian help, because they know that this money will not reach the population in need. It will end up in the pocket of politicians. And that's why Lebanon needs a deal with the IMF and to start the reform, because the IMF will be a signal that Lebanon started the reform. So it will be a signal for the international community to help Lebanon again, right? Without an IMF deal, Lebanon cannot regain the trust of the international community. For, I think, it will be very hard for the country to get out. Now, what are the things blocking those reforms? And that was the heart of your questions. Well, you have things blocking the reform. First, on the fiscal reform, on the government budget reform, the government likes to spend a lot of money. And the government, because politician has been using government spending as a tool for clientelism and as a tool for self-enrichment, right? So they contract government contracts, they give them to their cronies, to people who are connected to them. If they want to build, let's say, an electricity power plant that would cost, let's say, $10 million, they would bill it at $20 million, and take half of the money as commission and payback. So that's how they enrich themselves, through government spending. They also maintain their seats by doing clientelism. So basically, they hire people, give them fake government jobs so that those people can earn money, and then those people in return would vote for them, right? That's how they maintain their control over the political scene. They do it through this type of corruption, right? This type of clientelism and the cronyism. So it's very hard to convince politicians that now you need to stop doing that, and you need to have a balanced budget, and you need to fire all those excessive employees, and you need to stop contracting your cronies for government contracts, right? It's very complicated to convince them to do that because they are profiting from that. That's on the fiscal side. Now, on the banking crisis, where banks are in default, they are unable to pay their depositors. Well, good luck in convincing banks that you are actually bankrupt and you need to close. They would never admit it. What banks want to do, they want to actually cut depositors. So let the losses be bared by their depositors, and then continue business as usual. And bankers are very influential, right? They are very influential on the parliament. They are very influential on the government. So good luck in doing a suitable banking reform, right? Now, on the currency part, on the hyperinflation and the devaluation, the central bank is printing money in order to finance the government and in order to cover the bank losses. So again, same problem. As long as you have powerful banking sector and a government who is unwilling to reform, the central bank printing money, it's good luck in getting control over your currency, right? The electricity has been the milky cow for many political parties, making a lot of money via contracts related to the purchase of fuel, via contracts related to building new power plants. Electricity costs Lebanon around $40 billion in losses, right? Many people are making a lot of money from electricity, and good luck convincing them that they should, let it go and allow the country to have good electricity system. So I would say special interests mainly are blocking those reforms. A lot of special interests. Let's say that the people who are benefiting from the current system are actually the decision makers, and they won't take a decision that would harm their special interests.
Thanks, Patrick. That explains a lot, and a lot of reflections in Sri Lanka as well. But I want to push you an additional question. So there's a question from Amesh Disanayaka asking, how was the international foreign currency denominated debt restructured, and what were the terms? Any thoughts on that? How is the restructuring happen, and also how did you manage to get the imports? Because Gadia earlier said about 90% of your imports are from mainly on the energy sector is from Ukraine and Russia. How did you manage imports, and how did you restructure it, Patrick?
Okay, so first, the debt has not been restructured yet. Lebanon ceased payment, stopped the payment on the debt, on the bonds, what we call euro bonds, which is the dollar denominated debt. Okay, so we are in a cessation of payment. We are not paying our debt, but we did not start negotiating with the bondholders to restructure the debt. Normally, if you are negotiating an agreement with the IMF, you better get the agreement first and then negotiate with bondholders. So I think that we are waiting first to seal a deal with the IMF before actually doing the debt restructuring. Now, the Lebanese government bonds are trading for around 20 to 30 cents to the dollar. So you have an 80% haircut already on the value of those bonds, right? I think bondholders would accept to take a loss. If you offer them 60% haircut, I think they would take it. If you offer them 70% haircut, they may take it, but they need to be sure that they can recover the remaining 30% or 40% after the haircut. And in order to be sure that they will recover it, that you will need a deal with the IMF. And that's why the deal with the IMF is important. It will facilitate the restructuring process. That's on the debt restructuring. And the second point was on imports. Indeed, Lebanon has a big trade deficit. We do import a lot and we don't export a lot. Our exports are mainly tourism. People come spend their money in Lebanon, their dollars in Lebanon, some agro-food probably elements, but that's it. How did we finance our trade deficit? Well, through two channels. The first one is remittances, people working abroad, sending their money to Lebanon, and that's what Ghadir was mentioning. Lebanon exports their people abroad, and those people send dollars to their parents, and then, or to their families, and with those dollars, their family can import things from abroad. They can buy cars, they can buy fuel, they can buy electricity, everything is imported. So basically, this was a main source of financing the trade deficit. And another source of financing the trade deficit was the capital account surplus, in the sense that Lebanon was a financial hub in a way, or let's say the Lebanese banking system was very dynamic, attracting a lot of deposits from outside. So a lot of Lebanese expats placed their money in Lebanese banks, right, as deposits, and then those deposits were used in an indirect way. They ended up financing the current account deficit. So that's, this is what we call an imbalances, right, in a way, that have been piling up, and one of the reasons of the current crisis are those current account or those balance of payment imbalances.
Thanks, Patrick. Thank you very much. A quick follow-up question. I know you are an energy expert. What's the situation in the electricity? Because in Sri Lanka, we have a combination of hydro and running on diesel and coal. What is basically Ghadir told before you joined, there's power cuts going for about 20 hours. That's quite long. We are suffering with 6 to 12-hour power cuts. We got 13 hours maximum. What's the problem with energy, and what's the situation in Lebanon, and what is the situation now? Can you explain a bit?
My first advice is, don't let the government waste your time with a discussion on the sources of energy. Fuel versus coal versus solar versus wind. This is not this is only a diversion, okay? The real question is the energy sector is open to competition? Can you now come to the market, open an electricity company, and start selling electricity to the population freely without any barrier to entry? That's the real question, okay? It's not the job of the government to decide how do we produce electricity and to who you sell it. The government should put a legal system that would protect investors and attract them to the energy market, and let them decide. Maybe it's better for me to open an electricity production company based on solar power, because maybe in Sri Lanka you have a lot of sun, I don't know, or maybe you have a lot of wind, or maybe you have a lot of coal. Every investor should be able to open an independent power production company and sell his electricity to the public without any government interference. And then the trial and error and the innovation and entrepreneurs can solve the problem. That's the only solution for the problem. And if you do that, you will have many people who will produce electricity on renewable. You have other people who would use coal. Other people may use gas. Other people may use fuel. Let them do whatever they want, and let the population choose from which supplier they would like to buy their energy. This is the problem. The problem of this is the solution. The problem of the electricity The government has the monopoly over the production, the transmission, and the distribution of electricity. And since the government has the monopoly, nobody is allowed to get into the market, produce electricity, and sell it. Although the population is willing to buy electricity, they are currently paying crazy prices for inefficient diesel generators in order to buy electricity. I mean, now we are paying more than 30 cents per kilowatt hour to those generators owners, right? And the government is also very inefficient in producing electricity. The cost of production of electricity in the government is also around 30 cents. While if in Lebanon, for example, you allow people to produce and sell electricity based on solar, the cost of solar is 6 cents per kilowatt hour, right? You can go between 6 to 9 cents, including storage. You can go down from 30 cents to 6 cents. You just need to allow people to invest in the sector. But then the government would love to maintain their monopoly over the sector because there is a lot of special interest in the sector and they don't want to open it to competition. So that's my intake on the energy sector.
Thanks, Patrick. Very clear and crystal clear explanation, and I reflect lot of reforms in Sri Lanka as well. Gadia, I want to move to you. I want to understand about the political reforms in Lebanon at the same time. From what I read, was in Lebanon, the parliament has to have the president has to be a Catholic, a Maronite Christian, and the speaker has to be a Shia Muslim, and the PM has to be a Sunni Muslim. Is that right? Are my sources right? And what sort of political reforms play a massive role in these sort of crises? I just want to understand your end, and also Gadir, how did women respond to this crisis? Because they are mainly taking a lot of burden on this, on childcare, on work culture, on household work, and many other things. So what's the impact on women? You mentioned there were suicidal cases very early
Amongst
on
the
this
youth.
discussion.
Yeah.
Can you shed light on all these too?
Yeah, regarding what you said regarding the president, the prime minister, and the speaker of parliament, this system was formed after the civil war in Lebanon. As we talked about it, there was a 15-year civil war, and after the civil, can you hear me?
Yes, Gadir.
Yes. After the civil war ended, there was an agreement that we refer to as the Ta'if agreement. Ta'if is a city in Saudi Arabia where political leaders, went to Ta'if and made this agreement that in order to secure civil stability in the country, let's just give every sect a scope in the government, and that way it was supposed to ensure harmony. But of course, unfortunately, it has caused more sectarian tension. It caused more sectarian tension because maybe there's someone who can be a president, or can be a speaker of the parliament, or can be a prime minister, but is not from this specific sect. They will not be allowed. So this is why it causes tension. What's happening is that as the situation is deteriorating and people are sitting outside, like people do not have jobs anymore, husbands are sitting at home, the youth are sitting at home, the mothers or the women have had to deal with the burdens of their families collapsing, maybe emotionally. Some NGOs, we have like an NGO in Lebanon called Embrace, which is providing mental health services just a phone call away. They now have a hotline, and they're trying to provide mental health services for the people to help them cope with the situation. I actually had an interview with the head of this NGO. Her name is Mia Atwe, who's actually now also running for the elections. The head of this NGO that has a suicide hotline to help, and they have psychologists just a phone call away to help give an ear to the people who want to speak about the burdens. And she was saying that more and more people are calling her with suicide thoughts, especially after 2 a.m. So this is the situation not only for women, but for the citizens in general. You know what I mean? It's not only the women who are suffering from this. The whole country is suffering from this crisis. And as I said, the women are bearing the burdens of their families, and the whole country being in a very chaotic situation.
Thanks, Gadir. Patrick, just we are also reaching to the final few minutes of our discussion. Patrick, what would be your advice for Sri Lankan people? How should they get prepared to survive in this crisis? Just to share, we also have a lot of protests now going on, and our currency has depreciated by about 60% for the moment, and we are in the process of debt restructuring. We have suspended all our debt payments to external parties, not the local debt, mainly the international debt. And we are going for IMF negotiations on the 18th. So it's not like a hard default, but pretty much like very close, like a managed or a preemptive default. What's your advice on preparations for Sri Lankans for the coming crisis?
Well, first, it's way wiser to go into this kind of default and not do it Lebanon style. So it's better to have a negotiated default rather than an erratic default the way it happened in Lebanon. So that's a good thing. Now, if you are expecting hard times to come, what you should do is you should try to have some dollars hidden somewhere, not in the banking system, in a safe, because if the currency loses more of its value, then you can always convert your dollars into the local currency at a good rate. So that's, I think, is a good let's say, protection mechanism. So that's one. Now, in the US, you have also a high inflation of 7%, 9%. So it means that the US dollar is also losing its value, but it's not losing its value as quickly as the Lebanese pound or as the Sri Lankan currency, right? So it's still a better deal. Now, of course, you might have other alternatives. You might decide to buy some gold, maybe as a protection. Although commodities are quite expensive today, that might be also another option. So that's about the savings, right? I mean, keep your saving in a currency that you can trust. Two, you need to be working in a sector that pays you in foreign currency. So you need to be working in exporting businesses. I think that with the devaluation, the purchasing power of the local population would be weaker. So any industry that relies on selling goods to the local population will have hard time, right? The winning industries will be the industries that export good abroad, because those industries can now rely on a cheaper labor. Everything is cheaper now in Sri Lanka if you do the count in US dollars, right? In the local currency, everything is more expensive, but in US dollar, labor wages are many fixed costs are lower, which means that local companies now can export better. So if you can reposition yourself to be in an exporting business rather than in an importing business or a sales business, I mean, locally, that I think that would be also a good positioning. So those are mainly the two advices I would give.
Thanks, Patrick. I just also wanted to know about, in terms of reforms, how should we move forward? You basically mentioned about the challenges, and the other main question is how long will it take for us to recover? What are your thoughts on that?
So I would not I am unable to answer about Sri Lanka specifically, but I can talk in general, right? Because every country is different from the other. In general, what you need to do, you need to dismantle. So what are the reforms, right? One, you need to dismantle all government monopolies. So you need to dismantle the government monopoly over electricity. You probably have a government monopoly over telecommunication, I'm not sure, or over internet, maybe over airlines. Maybe you have only one local airlines company. So you need to dismantle all government monopolies, right? Allow competition in those sectors. Allow competition in those sectors, because competition would give you a better electricity, and a better electricity will stimulate industry, it will stimulate services, right? And if you have a competition in the airline sector, you will have lower air transportation tickets, and it will bring you more tourists. And if you have competition in telecommunications, then you will have cheaper internet, and then you can have a high-tech industry locally, right? So you need to dismantle all those monopolies with the help of the IMF. Now, the IMF usually like to reform monopolies, make them more transparent, rather than dismantle them and open them to competition. I think that's the role of organization like Advocata Institute, like you guys, where you should be pushing, working with everybody to say, listen, we don't want to fix the public monopoly. It won't work. We need to open the sector to competition. So those are very important reforms to be done. Other important reforms are you need to have a balanced budget, right? Just like in Lebanon, a balanced budget. I mean, the government deficit and debt is the root of all the problem that you are currently having. The devaluation is caused by the fact that the central bank has been financing government deficit. So the root of the problem is always government debt. You need to push for a balanced budget. Maybe you want to change the law, to put it in the constitution that it is not allowed to have a budget where you have deficit, right? Maybe, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. But you need to balance the budget. That's good. That's very important. And three, you need to put massive controls over monetary policy. You should not allow your central bank to finance government or to create inflation, right? And there are many ways to do that. Independence of the central bank, that might be one way. A more drastic way might be to establish a currency board. I don't know. I mean, again, I don't know the situation in Sri Lanka, but the central bank should stop covering up for government messes and creating inflation to finance government. I mean, I think those are very important reforms. If you do those reforms, then I think you'd be in a better place within, let's say, 5 years. If you don't do those reforms, then you are headed to a very hard place, just like Lebanon.
Thanks, Patrick. Thank you very much. But we have a few more questions. I think we can few a little bit more time on this. Gadir, I just wanted to understand also on the social impact. You mentioned about how people supported and the suicidal matters and things like that. Any other additional social impact that people have to be careful about, have to prepare in advance? From the women's point of view, what is your advice for Sri Lankan people and mothers and sisters? How should they prepare for this crisis, Gadir?
In the beginning, when prices started skyrocketing, people were trying to hoard or like buy a lot of food products, of utilities that they might need. But of course, this is not really sustainable. You know what I mean? Like people were trying to buy, keep at home because the prices were going to skyrocket. But also, there is only so much that you can buy at the end of the day, only so much that you can save at home. This is what people were doing. Now, people are resorting to online businesses as a way of supporting their families. So I'm seeing a lot on Instagram and on social media, mothers who are cooking and trying to sell this food, people who are doing some arts and crafts and trying to sell them. They're resorting to online, making some kind of jewelry and accessories. Uh, People used to import their clothes in Lebanon. If they weren't buying from international brands, they were importing from Turkey. Now they are trying to make them at home. So this is what's mainly happening, and what people are trying to do, trying to come up with their own businesses, small businesses and small initiatives using social media, because of course now rent is very high. This is mainly what people are trying to do, trying to rely on small initiatives, businesses, anything that you know how to make. So, for example, let's say you know how to sew, you would try to make your own clothing business. I'm seeing this is very common now. This is mainly what people can do, trying their own initiatives on the hopes that the government would provide real change, which is actually more sustainable. But realistically speaking, this is what's happening in Lebanon. People are trying to come up with their own online businesses to try and sustain themselves as the collapse keeps deteriorating more and more every day.
Thank you, Gadir. Patrick, I just wanted to also understand on the geopolitical point of view, how was the support received from Lebanon, from other countries, additionally from the diaspora who live outside Lebanon, and also to get an estimation of how many people actually left Lebanon? Are you also following for the intellectuals who left the country, Patrick? And I just want to understand the geopolitical aspect and also the brain drain that happened in Lebanon.
Well, on the geopolitical aspect, the situation is not better than the economic aspect, right? Lebanon has a lot of problems with neighboring countries. We had a lot of tension with the GCC, the oil countries like Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Kuwait, all those countries. We have a lot of tensions. We had some diplomatic problems with them that might impact their, let's say, their desire to host more Lebanese expats, right? So given those tensions, I think less people are able to find jobs in those countries. It would impact people as well. Now, so that on the geopolitical situation is not very good for Lebanon, because people who traditionally used to help Lebanon, they don't really trust the current government. They would like to see reform, even the West, right? Even countries like France, who traditionally is inclined to help Lebanon, organize some, international forums to bring support to Lebanon. They know that if they bring any money into Lebanon, the political establishment will steal them. So they say, why would we do that? You need to do your reforms first, then we will send you money. Thus the importance of sealing a deal with the IMF. So that's on geopolitics. Now, on the other side, what was it? Yeah, how many people have left the country?
Yeah.
The brain drain. Well, Lebanon historically relied on services. And by services, I mean that, Lebanon, when you ask Ghadir, what does Lebanon export? We did not really have an answer to that, because Lebanon relies on services in the sense that in Lebanon, we used to have really good hospitals, really good universities, and people from the region would come to learn in Lebanon. They would come and to get their to get fixed, basically. They would see doctors in Lebanon. They would do their surgeries in Lebanon, and all this qualified labor is actually leaving the country now. And we had like all the good teachers, all the good professors, all the good doctors actually left the country already. And so it has been massive. I don't have numbers. I don't have exact numbers, but I can tell you quality-wise, all those who are qualified and can find a job abroad have already left the country.
Patrick, also I just wanted to ask you, when I check the exchange rate on the Lebanese pound on the Google, it says still 1,500. When I did further research, I realized there are three exchange rates going in Lebanon. One is by the banks, which is I think 1,500, and I think there's another one from the economics division or the trade department, which is I think slightly higher, about 2,500. Market, it's about 24,000. Can you explain these multiple exchange rates? What's going on here?
Sure, absolutely. Well, that's another advice. If you have money at the bank, maybe you need to try to get it out, by the way. Well, my first thing to say is, so you should never trust Google. You need to find more reliable sources, not only for exchange rate, but like for everything. That's one. So yeah, officially, the exchange rate in Lebanon before the crisis was 1,500 Lebanese pound to the dollar, right, before the crisis. This was the official exchange rate, and this number did not change. So the official exchange rate is still 1,500, but the reality now is very different. So officially, we are still at 1,500. However, if you go to the bank and you want to withdraw some dollars from the bank would never give you your money in dollars. They would give you your money at an exchange rate of 8,000 Lebanese pound per dollar, up to a certain ceiling, let's say up to $500 per month. And if you want to withdraw more than $500, anything above this ceiling, they would only allow you to withdraw it in Lebanese pound also, but at an exchange rate of 1,500. That's where the 1,500 exchange rate plays, right? Anything above that ceiling, you are back to the. So if you are withdrawing your money in Lebanese pounds from the bank, you have two exchange rates. You have the 8,000 for the first $500, and then the 1,500 for anything above. But in reality, as you said, the black market rate, which is the real true exchange rate, is now around 25,000, 24, 25,000 Lebanese pound per dollar. So what that means is that when you go to the bank and you want to withdraw your dollar deposits, and the bank allows you to withdraw it only in Lebanese pound at 8,000, while the actual real exchange rate is 25,000, it means that the bank is imposing a haircut of what, like 60, 70% on your money, right? They are actually taking 70% of the value of your money and giving you the remaining. So those are the multiple exchange rate regimes. They are put in place in order to basically discourage people from withdrawing their money from the bank. They are kind of an implicit capital control. So, and also because banks don't have the money to pay people back, so they need to pay them less, and they can do that through this multiple exchange rate regime. Now, of course, this is very bad and this is very ugly because it hinders all the production of the country, right? People are now focused on how to take advantage through the arbitrage on those different exchange rates. They buy checks, sell checks, things like that, instead of focusing their energy on productive activities, right? So this is very harmful for the economy in general.
Patrick, very quick follow-up question. Since you mentioned a lot of dollar earnings of Lebanon is on the service sector, now Sri Lanka is also having a argument that we should not depend on the service sector. We have to produce more. And if you look at our composition, it is mainly we have a little bit on tea, coconut, and rubber exports, and mainly on apparels. And also we have a big service sector. We have remittances we had about $8 billion at one point, and it slowly slowed down with having multiple exchange rates. What are your views now? Lebanon, you pretty much said you have nothing much to export. It's basically things like education and remittances. Is it like a based on services? Is it a bad idea, or what's your advice on that, Patrick?
So my advice is you need to be very careful of those social engineers who think they know better how the economy should look like, right? And they believe, you have a person who decides that industry and agriculture is better for the economy. You need to be very careful, right? Those decisions should not be made top down, okay? The economy knows what is better for the economy. If in Sri Lanka, I won't talk about Sri Lanka, I will talk about Lebanon, but I think you can relate to that, right? The idea is in Lebanon, we don't have electricity, right? So you cannot have an industry sector, an industrial sector without electricity, because industry needs electricity, right? But also you cannot have an advanced agricultural sector without electricity, because agriculture needs irrigation, and irrigation needs electricity. So Lebanon went into services not because we don't want to work in agriculture or industry, but because we cannot. Government has monopolized electricity, ruined the electricity sector. And now if you tell the Lebanese you need to stop doing services and go to agriculture or go to industry, and if they go there, you will be ruining them, because they won't be able to be competitive. They won't be able to produce food at a lower cost. It will be more expensive than actually importing food. They won't be able to produce manufactured good. It will be cheaper if you import it. So you will be actually destroying your services sector without getting anything in return. The same way we in Lebanon destroyed our banking sector without having an alternative. That's why never listen to those people who think they know better what the economy should be producing. You just need to provide a system where basically everybody has the opportunity to work in any sector. So dismantle your monopolies, allow people to produce electricity, telecom, internet, airline, travel, everything. And then the economy will figure out what it can produce more effectively. Every entrepreneur would love to go to the sector where he can make the most profit. And this sector is the sector where Sri Lanka will be strong in. So it's up to the entrepreneur who are risking their own money to decide where this money should go, not about some bureaucrats who think they know better than those who are risking their own money.
Thanks, Patrick. Thank you very much. Before I move to the final round, Gadir, what are your final remarks, final thoughts on how you basically, what's your advice and how you basically survived the crisis, and how was the crisis? And I would like to hand over the floor to you for your final thoughts, Gadir.
I think that as long as someone in a crisis that's in Lebanon, and like the crisis in Lebanon and the same crisis, the same kind of crisis that's happening in Sri Lanka, the people who are able to survive are the ones that have US dollars. So my advice would be, if you have US dollars, save them. As Dr. Patrick said, try to take them out of the bank. Try to limit your spending so you have more dollars, because the situation seems to be heading to a very hard position. And if you can try to open your own business, try to come up with your own initiative using free online methods, that could be a temporary solution as the situation deteriorates. And if you have family members living abroad who can help you, I think this is the time to ask for their help. This is basically it. And this is, I work for an international organization. So people who are able to receive their money in US dollars, who are able to secure jobs with international NGOs, I think this is what the only thing that can happen, because when the country is in crisis alone, what can you do? You try to come up with small reforms on a personal level to ensure that you're doing well until major reforms take place.
Thanks, Gadir. Thank you very much. Patrick, any final thoughts, final remarks on how we should do, what we should do, and what should we do to make the reforms happen?
So first, I would like to thank you again for hosting me for this fascinating conversation, and thank you for having the patience to make the thing work despite the technical problems that we were facing. I think my advice is, I would say that organization like yours, the AdvoChats Institute, should play a big role in voicing those reforms, in educating the public on the importance of dismantling monopolies, on the importance of balancing the budget. You will hear a lot of rumors saying that the dollar is going up and the currency is being devalued because of black market.
Patrick, I think we lost you for a few seconds. Let's wait for a few seconds to connect it back. In the meantime, I would like to thank Gadir for joining with us. Thank you, Gadir. Really helpful, and really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for hosting me, really.
Yes, it means a lot. Let's wait for Patrick to hopefully reconnect. Let me call him back again. So that's the situation for those who joined. Basically, Lebanon's, the situation on the exchange rate, and also, their food prices have increased about like to 4 times. Patrick, we can hear you. We dropped you when you said like don't there'll be conversations on exchange rate depreciation, so on and so forth. That's where we lost you.
That, yes. So the government blaming the private sector systematically. They will blame the black market dealer, the hawala dealers, for the devaluation of the currency. This is not true. The only reason the currency is being devalued is because the central bank have been increasing money supply, and you should be there to explain that, AdvoChats Institute. Many people will blame private businesses, businessmen, traders, for any problem that happens in the country. This is not true. The real problem comes from the government high spending and government monopolies. And I think that you guys have a very important and crucial role to educate the public on those issues, because if the public is aware of the causes of the problem, then the government won't be able to continue doing those problems over and over. While if the public does not really know, what are the real reason behind those problems, then the government can lie to those people and let them believe whatever they want. So I think that you guys have a very important role to play in driving your country out of the crisis through education and public policy and advocacy.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. And with regardless of all the technical difficulties, I'm very glad that finally I could connect with you, even on like the basic way of like getting through WhatsApp. Thank you very much, Patrick. I really appreciate your time and your expertise, and it was really helpful. We had a very good audience here today on YouTube and on Facebook, and I'll share the links. And thank you very much for all the questions. I think we answered almost all the questions. Only I think there was a question on cryptocurrency was left. Patrick, do you have any thoughts on this? Cryptocurrency has been also getting traction. Is it a solution to overcome the crisis? So then I think we can wrap it up with that.
So people at the beginning of the crisis, people bought crypto to be able to send money abroad and receive money from abroad. When the banking system was not working properly, people tried to rely on crypto as an alternative solution for money transfer, right? So it was helpful at this level. The advantage of crypto is that, well, you have all type of crypto. So when I say crypto, I'm mainly thinking about Bitcoin, right? Not all the million type of crypto that exist out there. Cryptos are interesting in the sense that government cannot print crypto indefinitely. But on the other hand, crypto supply cannot be adjusted to suit the market needs. So if people need less or more money, it still have some difficulties. I think where we are now is cryptocurrencies like Bitcoins are not really a currency, in the sense that you can rarely find places where you can buy food and coffee using crypto payment. So it's not really a currency, but it is a very interesting asset class. The same way you invest in gold, in oil, in stocks, you can invest in crypto. It's a very interesting asset class from a diversification point of view. If you want to diversify your portfolio, that would be in some cases, if you are unable to transfer money abroad, can also use crypto to do that. I think those are today the two ways we are using crypto, not really as money, but more as assets easily transferable.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Gadir, for joining us. And I really appreciate your time again. So I'll again reach out to you when the crisis, the way that the crisis is going on in Sri Lanka. At the moment, it's the balance of payment crisis and some sort of political crisis. And we hope that things would be better. But let's see, and I'll reach out to you, Patrick and Gadir. And please like us,
Thank you
share
so
us,
much.
and click that bell button so you will get updates. And we are on all the social media channels, including TikTok. So you are free to subscribe us so then you can get to know our content. And we are mainly on the Singular on the Advocata Plus platform. We are on YouTube. We are on Facebook. So please subscribe us, like us, share the content so more people will get to know about it. As Advocata, we are always committed to policy reforms and bring the actual fact and data driven public policies for the betterment of people based on free markets. And that's our view and our role. So Patrick and Gadir, thank you very much. I deeply appreciate it again, and we'll see you again on a new video. And thank you very much for joining with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Thank
hosting
you.
us.
Thank you for hosting.